Hi, and welcome to our CwC UI user interface click game. This game is going to be a pretty cool game where you're going to have objects coming from the bottom of the screen that our players are going to need to click on, and we're going to be keeping score, and we're going to be using the user interface to make a start screen and a difficulty screen. So we'll go ahead and jump in and get started. I've already downloaded a package. This will be in Classroom for you called CwC UI Click. I'll put it on my desktop, and I'm going to make a new project. We'll be using a 3D game here. We will be making this actually in 2D, but since we're using some 3D objects, let's just stick with 3D for now, and I'll make my project name. And I'm going to call this UI Click and create. While this is loading, let's talk a little bit more about what this game is going to be doing. The things that we're going to need for a game like this are going to be random objects that are going to come up from the bottom of the screen. We're going to click on the good ones, and the score will go up for our player. And if they click on the bad ones, the score will go down. So we'll need to do some scorekeeping. Also, something that will randomly cause the items to spawn at different positions so that we won't know, and at different heights. They can make the game a little more challenging. Also, because it's going to be a clicking game, we're going to make sure that we can click in the world space, click on objects, and have some interaction with that. So as soon as I come in, this is my setup here. If you don't have this set up, remember go to Layout, and you can change this. It should be on default for you, maybe. I like to put my game right here on the side, though, so I can see it. And remember sometimes just going over here to, instead of free aspect, let's go to 16 by 9. That's my preferred perspective for the camera here. So let's go ahead and put that package in. So I'll drag this into my projects area. It'll ask me if I want to import, and I'll import everything. And giving it a second to do that. Currently our game is a 3D game, but this is going to be basically a flat 2D game that we're going to be inside of. So we'll be changing that inside of our scene. But first, down here in your projects area, go to Scenes and go to Prototype 5. And currently in my game view, I can see that I do have a background area here with two borders, and we can see them here. If I click on them in the hierarchy, you're going to see that it highlights them, but I can't really see them. And that's because my camera is not in the right place to do that. Now I could just hold down Option and move my camera, and you can see from the back I can't see it, but from the front I can. But instead of doing that, there is a button here that says 2D, and this puts us into a 2D view. So I can double click on my background to kind of zoom in some. That's basically it. Like, we're going to be working in a 2D view. We have a background, two borders, so a left border and a right border, and a sensor, which you probably can't see. It's way down here, and this is just an object that has a box collider. And we'll be using that to determine if our objects go below the screen. There's a couple different ways to do it, but we will be using our collider to do that. So great. We have some options for the background, but let's keep this as is. If you wanted to change this, you know that the background object here, we could probably just drag in. You have inside of your assets course library. I think it's in textures. You have a couple different ones that you could just drag in to switch this out. But I'm going to keep mine as is for now. So the first thing is we need to put in 3 good objects, objects that we are going to be wanting to click, and 3 bad objects. So assets, go in our course library, and I think it's in the props folder here. You have a couple different models. I'm going to use good, like the good items. Let's see what's another. Some barrels, some crates, and things like that. I will be using food as my good objects. So let's start off with an apple. And let me just drag this into my hierarchy for this first one. And we're going to repeat this process for each of the good items. So I'm going to go over here and change its name to good 1, press return. And this object is going to be using the physics of the world. So it's going to be hurled up into the air and come back down. And since we know we're using the natural physics, we're going to want to add a rigid body. And even though we are in a 2D space right now, we're actually still using a 3D object. This apple is a 3D object, so we need to use a normal rigid body. And we're going to be looking for detection. So if we collide using our mouse, if we click on it, or also when it goes down to the sensor if we collide. So we need to add a collider. So we'll be just adding a box collider. And once again, not the 2D one, we'll be using a 3D box collider. Great. So that should be good. Let's look at this first one. And even though I'm in 2D, I'm going to click off of 2D just for a second. Just so I can see if my collider is around it, and that looks pretty great. So I'm going to snap back here. So here's the first one. Let's repeat the process for another apple. And for my sake, I'm just going to kind of space them out across this bottom so that they look evenly, so I can see them easily. So that will be on my position on the X. I can just kind of drag that over. Yeah. All right, let's do another good item. Let's get the, I don't know, not feeling particularly creative here. Let's just go with the green apple. If I put it in the hierarchy, it snaps it into 0, 0, so it puts it right in the middle. So this is good 2. And box collider and rigid body. Make sure when you type the name in up here that you're pressing return so the name is saved. And you'll know that it is because it'll change in the hierarchy. There you go. So got those two on that. And let me move this position over a little bit. We're going to have 4 objects in total. 2 good and 2 bad. Let's do the steak as my next one. And once again, you can choose whatever ones you would like. So good, 3. Press return, add component, rigid body, and a box collider. The order in which I add these doesn't matter. And then finally, let's, you know what? I don't like the way it's sitting right now. We'll be changing this in a script later on, but I want to have it facing up just so we can see it right now in the game. So I'm just going to rotate that one along the X axis, I believe. Yeah. So this, like, I probably want a positive 90 to get it facing forward. That looks good. And I'm just going to move it on the X just a little bit. Once again, just so I can see here. And it's partially off the screen, but that's okay for now. And I'm going to go back into my props folder. There's a bad folder, and I have 2. I have a skull and the bomb. I like the skull. That looks pretty good. It's a little bit bigger than the other ones, but that's okay. Let's change that into bad 1. And add component, box collider, and a rigid body. Great. So all 3 of these are here in the hierarchy, but we're going to, just like we've done before, we're going to sort of instantiate these into the world using prefabs. So we definitely need to prefab these. But before we do that, let's go ahead and add a script to them. Just do it now and then prefab them so we don't have to worry about it later. So I'm going to go back into my assets and create a new folder, plus folder, and this will be our scripts folder. Press return. And in the scripts folder, I'm going to make a new script called target. We'll call these objects our targets. All 4 of these are our target, are a target. And I can drag this onto good 1, good 2, good 3, and bad 1. Perfect. We're going to edit this in a second. Actually, I'm going to try to open this up in Visual Studio. It takes a while. While that's opening, back in my assets folder, I will hit the plus symbol here, create a new folder. Oops, I created in the wrong spot. If you ever do that, you can just control right click and delete here. What happened was I had this selected. Come on, Visual Studio. There you go. Target is open. So just make sure you're in the assets folder. Let me try it again. New folder. There you go. And we'll call this prefabs. And take good 1 and put it in there. Original prefab. Good 2. Good 3. And bad 1. There you go. We have our prefabs here. And I'm going to delete them from the scene here. I don't need these anymore. I could just disable them like this so they're not in there. Let's just do that. Let's just disable it for now. We'll know what it is that we want, because we're just going to put them in the world by instantiation. All right, so let's think through what we want our targets to do. So I'm going to click back on Visual Studio. Well, the first thing I would want for them to do is I would want to use a rigid body to throw them into the air. So let's think about that first. So if I'm going to get a rigid body, let's go ahead and create a variable for it at the top. So I'm going to go to line 6, press return, and it's going to be private because we're not going to. It's going to look. This script is on each one of our targets, and so it'll just look at that target and say, "Oh, find the rigid body that's on there." So private rigid body, and I'll just call it target RB. Put a semicolon. And I haven't actually set it to a specific rigid body. It doesn't know which one to get, so let's initialize that inside of start. So I'm going to go to line 11 and say target RB is set equal to, and this is getting the component, because a rigid body is a component, get component, open and close carets, and we need to say what component on the target, which will be its rigid body. And it has an argument, but we're not putting anything in there, so let's just do a semicolon. All right, so for now, just for our testing purposes, we're going to say whenever the game starts, we will just have them throw these upwards into the air. So let's think. Start. So we're going to take that rigid body called target RB. We're going to push it into the air. So add a force. And add force wants to know, as you can see here, it needs to know a vector 3, so in which direction, and by how much, so that's what the blue one is, force, and then finally, a force mode, dot mode, right? So we've done force mode dot impulse, we've looked at all those. So those are the things we need to add in here. So let's open up an argument here. So the first thing is, let's go ahead and add a vector 3. Which direction do we want it to go? And we're going to apply the force in an upwards direction. So that would be a vector 3 dot up. And instead of us just having a set force, because that's our next thing, multiply by set force. So all of the objects will go to the same height. Let's do a random range. Let's say we want to apply a force between this number and this. So random dot range. And then we have to choose a minimum and a maximum. And for now, let's just put the numbers here in the start method. We will obviously go back and have a variable at the top to hold that information. For now, let's just say 12 is the minimum force that we could use and 16 is the maximum force. Okay, outside of those parentheses, let's put a comma. And we want to say what force mode do we want to apply. And we want to look at its mass, so the weight of the object. So that means either force mode dot impulse or force mode dot force, and we want it to just get knocked up almost if it's jumping. So I would probably use force mode dot impulse. Force mode dot impulse. Oops, gotta finish spelling the word out. There you go. Impulse. That's why. Oh my gosh, this is embarrassing. Well, it's fine. So you know what? I'm going to save this. I haven't saved yet. I can see here. So I'm going to save that and go back over here into our game. And let me just turn one of these on. And when I press start, this should push it up at a random rate. So let's press play. There you go. Well, that went pretty high. I wonder if that was 16. Let's try it again and see if it goes to a different height. Yeah, it was a little bit lower. I could see the other one. It cleared all the way to the top. Great. So we know that works. I'm going to turn this one back off. Or actually, I'll just leave it on. We'll just use one of these as a test object. What I'm noticing, though, it goes straight up and then straight back down, which isn't that interesting. So let's also just make it spin. Yeah, let's have it rotate. Now we have 3 rotations. And we can have it rotate along the X. So it would rotate... if I'm looking at this apple, it would rotate around like this. Along the y, a rotation of the y, so this axis here. X would rotate front to back like this. Y would rotate around like this, and Z would rotate what we consider diagonally, like that, sort of. Yeah. So how about we have it choose randomly to spin along the X, Y, and Z? Just apply a force along those axes to give it a random sort of spin. So let's do that here on at the end of line 12. So let's do the same. Target RB dot, and instead of adding a force, we want it to rotate. And we've used this before when we did our play canvas game. When we made our spaceship, we used a line of code called add capital T torque. And torque is for rotation. Force is in one direction. Torque is for rotating around an axis. And what does add torque want? What are the arguments it needs? The parameters. It needs to know which directions and how much force, and then a force mode. Now this might look a little crazy, but we want it to rotate along a random number on the X, a random number on the Y, and a random number on the Z. So let's open up argument. And instead of saying vector3 dot up, because vector3 dot up will mean it'll rotate along the y-axis. We don't want that. We want it to rotate randomly across 3 different ones. We have to put those numbers in ourselves. So we're going to say random dot range. So this will be our X. And let's say just -10 to +10. So this is our X. It'll come up with a random number for X. A random force to apply on X. And comma. Let's do Y. And we'll do the same thing. Random dot range -10, +10, comma. And let's do the same thing for Z. You know what might be more interesting? I'm going to pause here. You just don't erase your code. Just stay with me for just a second. I'm going to just show you how this works right now. I'm going to put a 0 in for Y and a 0 in for Z. And I'm going to go ahead and just say comma. It needs to know what my force mode is. I'll go ahead and put force mode. And same thing, we're going to just do it instantaneously. So dot impulse, like that. And put a semicolon. So this one here should only rotate at a random number on the x-axis between -10 and 10. Let's just try that out and see if that works. And see how the spin changes every time. There you go. It's applying a force, so it's spinning along the x-axis. Great. So now let's go back and add this in, the random dot range in the y position. I wish I thought of that before you started typing out with me, but that's all good. So now I'm leaving the z alone. I'm going to save that. And now we should see it spin a couple different ways, like 2 different ways now. Boom. So now it's kind of spinning, yeah, like around and a little bit on the x. And then we're adding the z in by doing the same thing. I just want to explain why it looks like a long line of code. So random dot range into z, -10, 10. And this should make it look more like a real spin because it's involving all the axes. Save that. See what we get here. Yeah, that looks a lot better. That looks like a normal sort of throw. We're getting all 3 of the possible rotations involved there. Great. All right, the last thing we probably want to do is give it a random position to start at. Right now it's starting like where I set the prefab right here. But why don't we go ahead and say when the game starts, take your transform dot position and choose somewhere along this x-axis. So what's the furthest over on the x we would want it to go? Let's look. Like right here touches the edge. That's -4.66. So how about we just say like what does -4 look like? Let's just say between -4 and +4 on the z-axis. Choose a random number and spawn there. And let's go ahead and say we don't want to start right here at the very edge. Let's move it down where we want it to be. By the way, don't set your numbers down. I'm just trying to figure it out. It's when we put in the code. So let's drop it down. Let's say, I don't know, -2. What does that look like here in the scene? Yeah, we'll just start like at -2. So it'll choose a random number here on the X and then always start at -2. So let's go do that. So when the game starts, so I'm now in my line 14. I'm still inside of my start method. Make sure I'm above this parentheses. I'm going to take my transform dot position and set it equal to a new vector 3, since we're talking about an XYZ position. And we're going to say random. For X, it's going to be a random range, random dot range. And on the X, we'll say that it was between, oh, you said -4, comma, +4. And then comma, for our Y, we said that we want it to always be set to -2. And then we don't have to put anything in for Z. We could just say comma 0 here, and it will know that Z is flat. Or we can just leave it blank. It understands that vector 3, it just automatically puts in a VC right here. It says set Z to 0 by itself. We don't have to type that in. And put a semicolon. Well, let's see. Does this thing move to a random position? Always starting along this part of the Y, though. There you go. Perfect. That's great. So if I just turn all of these on, let's just see how they all look when we start. Oh, make sure I turn them on, actually. Did I turn it on good too? Yeah. Press play, and I should see them. There you go. Great. That's pretty good. I'm going to turn the rest of them off for now because we will be instantiating soon. I don't want to put too many items into the game at the beginning. And I haven't saved my game in a little bit, so I'm going to Command S to save that. Great. Now we have a lot of like random numbers sitting inside of our script, just like inside of the start method. So let's clean some of those up first. And also we have a lot of things being done in our start method. So I wonder if we can just make some methods to do some of this work here instead of doing it inside of start. It's always better to try to hold information in a separate method and call it somewhere else. This is good practice. So let's start working our way down these lines and figure out what numbers we need to get rid of. So it's like on line 12, I have these numbers here. The random the random force being applied to my upwards movement. So let's call it speed maybe. So the minimum speed was 12 and the maximum speed was 16. So I'm going to go to inline 7. Let's make a variable for each of those separately. This will be a private. And yeah, private float. Even though these are integers, you can random range is looking for, especially on int max, I can put int or float in. It's fine either way. I'm just going to go with float. It might give us more flexibility if we decided to have it. We'll call it minimum speed. We'll set it equal to 12. And next line, we'll call it a private float max speed. We'll set it equal to 16. All right, that line is done, and I can replace these two, this 12, with a min speed, and line 6, this one right here with a max speed. Great. Line 15, I have a, well, it looks like a -10 to 10. I can hold 10 as a torque. How about we just call this just torque. Yeah, torque speed or something. Yeah. Press return, private float. We'll call it torque. I guess torque speed is fine. We'll set it equal to 10. That's my color. So this is a negative torque speed. And this is just torque speed. And I'm going to go through and do that really quickly. I could just copy and paste, but it's probably even easier just to type it like this if you have IntelliSense on. Okay, that looks great. I'm gonna save that. And then I have some numbers here. And this is, I guess, my this is my x range, right? So my range between -4 and 4, and this is my y position. So let's do the x range first. So line 10, press enter. Private float, just staying with floats here. I'll say x range, and that's equal to 4. And I'll replace it in here, negative x range and x range. So I'm in line 18 for me doing this. And then this -2 was the y position that I wanted my targets to always start at. So y position. So equal to 2. Semicolon, and I'll make that a negative y position. Great, we've cleaned all of that up. But let's also move and let's hold some of this information down here. So let's make some methods to hold this. I'm going to go to in my line 26. No, I'm actually going to go in line 20. I lied. Press return. So the first thing I have is a random force right here being done. And so I'm just going to make a method to do that. I'm going to say vector 3, because it's a vector 3 being multiplied by a random number called random force. And argument, and since this is a method, let's go to the next line and open up these brackets. So what I'm basically going to do in here is replace this vector 3 slot right here with random force. And then I'm just going to take all of this, so line 17, I'm going to cut that right there and paste it into line 24. And the only thing that I have got to put in front of this is I need this information to come out of this. Like, normally when we say like void start, it executes code. It's like doing something at the start. But this right here isn't doing anything. It's just making a number. And that number needs to be able to be seen. So we need to say return at the very beginning. And let's put a semicolon at the end. So now here on line 17, I can just put in the phrase random force. And I need to put arguments still there. Done. Save. Same thing here. All of this random, this line right here that's making a random torque, right here, torque speed, I can make a method to hold that. So I'm going to go down to line 25, press return. So this was a float, right? So add torque is asking for a float on the x, y, z, as you can see right here. So I need to make a float. So that'll be a float, and that float, we'll call it random, let's just call it torque. Random torque, how about that? That looks better. Torque. Open and close some arguments, press return. Since it's a method, it always needs those curly brackets. And random torque is just going to be this first section of the line right here. Okay, and X, and I'm going to paste it here into line 28. Put a semicolon at the end, and because, once again, this is returning information, it's giving us a number or a value, we need to put return, line 28, return at the very beginning. And now I can put random torque, this method name, anywhere, so like line 18, so that's the X, and it's the same thing for the Y, and the same thing for the Z. We're not doing anything drastic here, so make sure you read through this line. Random torque, open close argument, comma, again. We're not doing anything drastic. We're not really changing anything in a major way other than cleaning up our code and making our code more consistent. This is just, once again, great practice. Last one I see is a random spawn position being done right here. So instead of this random range, I'm basically going through and taking all these random range lines, right? I'm going to take this and call it a random spawn position. That's going to make this on its own. So line 29, press return. and this is a vector 3. So sort of the same thing we did before. Vector 3. We'll call this random spawn POS. Argument at the end, press return is a method, so open, close curly brackets. We're returning a vector 3, so you need to return, so we're going to use that information, and that information is this right. Oh, we have to say new vector 3 though. Down here, new vector 3, and open this up, and we'll get this information here. Actually, all of this inside of here. Command X, and that goes inside of this on line 32, the argument after new vector 3. Paste it in there, put a semicolon. I think I did that right. Now where it says new vector 3 here, I just put in the name of this method inside of here on line 19. That should, let's save that and see if we get any errors. It looks like line vector 3 does not take a constructor that is worth 1. I think I did. Oh, when I did this here, I don't need to put in these parentheses here. Get rid of these two. I think I'll do it. Yeah. Let me save that. I think that's correct. Let's see. Line equals a new vector 3 random spawn.pos. Can I just put this here? I wonder if I can just delete that and open and close those brackets like that. Let's save that. Let's see if that's what I need. That's what I needed right here. I guess because I put my new vector 3 in here, I thought I had to do it both ways, but I could be wrong. Let's test this out and see if it works. There you go. Let's try press and play again, see if it finds a different position. Yep, it works. Okay, good. Well, I learned something new here. I don't know why I thought I had to put a new vector 3 inside here. That means it was just doing double the work. Great. So all of this is clean. Now, our next step is to make a object that is going to generate these prefabs right here into the game. But we want it to do more than that. We don't just want a spawner. We want an object that will spawn and keep score and also manage when the game is over. And so far we've been using a spawner game object to do that. But instead, let's do a game manager object, which is a very common practice for something that holds a bunch of information. A bunch of scripts point at it and look at it and say, oh, a game manager, the game is over, let's reload the scene. Instead of holding them on all the different items, like we've been using our player to restart a game at one point, we want the game manager to handle all that heavy lifting. So let's go over here to our hierarchy and hit plus, and let's create a game object, an empty game object right here. That's what it was, an empty game object. And the name will be game space manager. Press return. And let's go into our scripts folder, make a new script called game, no space, manager. And you will probably get this icon of a gear. And that's just because the game manager script is something that Unity knows is a very popular common script, and it gives us this icon so we can find it easily when you have a bunch of different scripts floating around. It's a nice little thing they've added for us. Let's go to the game manager object in the hierarchy, and let's add the game manager script to it, just so it's already done. And let's save. Now, what we're going to do differently, I'm opening up this game manager script, is before when we've done, we've made like choose a random item and spawned it into the world, we've done an instantiation using an array that holds multiple objects of the same type. we're going to do something just a little bit different. We're going to use a list. List is very, very similar. For our purposes, this is pretty much going to be the same, but there are some key differences between list and array. Lists typically have to go in sequential order, but they can be a bunch of different types of items. But the way they're declared in the script is a little bit different. So I'm going to go to line 6 here, and I'm going to make a public list. And you can see that it already has a carrots that come up. So let's add the carrots like this. And we need to say what type of objects are going to be in here. We're going to say game object. And then we give the list a name. The name of the list is going to be called our target. I'm going to put a semicolon. Save that. And let's go look at our game manager here in the hierarchy. And now you'll see a lot like an array. It'll have the name, and I press this here, and it'll ask the size. And currently we're going to have 4. Right? We're going to have 4 targets. And it wants me to put into here the ones that I have. So I'm going to lock my inspector just so I can make it easier for myself. Go to prefabs, and I'm going to pull these in here. So good 1, good 2, good 3, and bad 1. At this point, I can probably delete these that are in my game right now. So unlock my inspector, go to good 1. Actually, I can just control right click over here and delete these. So I have them as prefabs. They were good for testing. We're about to start putting these into the world for real. So my game manager now has a list of 4 items. And usually, like I said, a list wouldn't actually require that you go down in an order here, but we're going to make sure that it doesn't do that. We're going to do a coroutine that's going to, whenever the game starts, it's going to start spawning these objects. So let's go back to our game manager. And let's think about what do we want our spawn manager to do. And we're going to do it in a new way than we've done before, with a new line of code. We want it to say as long as we're going to just basically tell it to run through the list and every few seconds spawn an object. So let's start with that. So if we know we're going to be doing a rate, we're going to be instantiating. We need to know how often we want this to happen. So line 7, let's go ahead and create a private float. So float, and we'll call it spawn rate equal to, and we'll just say right now 1.0 f is per seconds. So we'll say that. So every second it will spawn 1 object. And let's go ahead and create I'm going to get rid of this void update for now. So delete that. Now let's create a coroutine. We've done this before, but we've only done it once, so I know it's a little rusty. We're going to do an IE numerator. Some people last time were making a numerable. We want a numerator. We need to give it a name, and we will call it spawn target. Make an argument, and then like a method, we'll create here. So the thing we're going to do that's a little bit different is we're going to do something called a while true loop. And a while true loop basically says it's almost like a mix between Hi, I was rewatching my explanation of the difference between if statements, for loops, and while true loops, and it was hard for me to watch. It was not good. So I want to try that again. So if statements, for loops, and while true loops. So we've done if statements before, but just to give it context again, we've said things like if input dot get key down, and we use a key code dot a, for example, and then we would follow it up with what we would want to do. Let's just say destroy the game object that this script is attached to. So this basically is if this occurs, then do this thing once. So that's usually the way you should phrase a statement. So if condition is met, do once. There you go. So that's it's not really a loop as much. I mean, but we put it inside an update typically. We'd put these lines right here inside of an update, and it would keep checking for that. So as long as we pressed A, it would destroy that game object. So it is in a way a loop, but it just loops that behavior one time. It does that behavior once based on the condition. Now we recently did a for loop. Now for loops had 3 different segments. So for, and then we would start off by saying, oh, there's an integer called I, and we would set it to 0 at the very beginning. Then we would say the condition or the amount of times we'd run this pattern, the information that would go below. So long as I is less than 3, that looks familiar. And then every time we would say I++. And if you recall, here's the information that goes below. We'll say the same thing, destroy. Now this of course doesn't make sense because once the game object destroyed itself, it would not be able to run these loops anymore. But that doesn't matter for our example. So this had 3 little parts to it. It was saying set an integer called I to 0, and then every time we run the loop, we would go up by 1, and then as long as it's less than 3, we'll keep doing this. So the way I would phrase this is do this many times. And that many times is the middle section, right? Well, the new loop that we're using in this one is just basically while true. And we can set a condition inside of this while true loop. So it's really kind of simple. It's just while, and you can put a condition inside of here. Usually, I'm just going to, for this example, we're going to say while true. While this is true, then do everything inside of here. And if this ever becomes false, then don't do this anymore. So the phrase I would use is do this as long as this condition is true. And this condition is whatever goes inside of this argument. So destroy game objects, what we would do as long as this condition, this argument is being met. Hopefully that makes more sense, but these are the 3 different ones we've looked at. But just follow along with me here. Okay, so while true, let's open up another condition here. While this is true, we are going to yield a new return. We've done this before when we did wait for seconds. We want to do this every so often. Wait for seconds, and we'll say our spawn rate, which is every 1 second. Semicolon. Now we need to know. Okay, so every second, then we want to instantiate. So instantiate. Now instantiate, as we've used it before, has had to have 3 arguments. But in this case, we don't actually need that. We just need to see, as you can see right here in my screen, it needs to know an object. What object? Or what is the original object itself? And we just want to pull something randomly from our targets list. So we're going to say targets. And just like an array, we're going to use brackets here. And we need to say which one of these randomly. Well, we need to do something to get one of these randomly, which we've done before. So I'm going to go to int line 20, press return, and an int, and we'll call it target index. So lists have index just like arrays. So 0, 1, 2, 3, that's the index number. So 0 is good number 1, 1 is good number 2. So we're going to say choose one of these randomly, this index numbers from the targets list, and then we'll instantiate it. So, and we'll choose randomly, a random dot range. And just like before, we need a minimum and a max. Well, our minimum is going to be 0. That's the lowest number we can do. And our max is going to be, well, with an array, we would say targets dot length. And the only real difference is here, instead of a length of an array, we're going to say count. It's going to count the list. And now let's just put this target index inside of these brackets on line 22. And outside of this, we still need a semicolon. I'm going to save this. Please look over this code really quick and make sure you have all of this done properly. Making sure you have these in the right position. Now we have a coroutine here, this spawn target, and the reason why it's an IE enumerator because it's going to it's going to create something as long as this condition is true. We need to call that coroutine. Right now this isn't going to do anything. So when the game starts, it will wait for a second. That's why we know it's a second. Choose a random object in our targets list and then put it into the world. So line 13, let's call that coroutine. Start the coroutine when the game starts, and the name of the coroutine, spawn target. We have to put the argument parentheses there and at the very end. So check your parentheses here, please. Save it, and we should see. Ooh, got an error. Game manager line 20. Line 20. It says I'm missing a semicolon. So yield new. Oh, I make this mistake all the time. It's return a new wait for seconds. That's what I'm supposed to do. Just like in our target script, it's a return new vector 3. I don't know why I struggle with that. I just some type of dyslexia. I'm not even joking. Like, it's a thing I always flip. I can't figure out why. All right, save that. Let's press play. 1 second. Oh, there you go. Every second, I'm getting a random object. Now, they are bumping into each other. Do I want to fix that right now? Nah, this is fine. Now, right now, you can see that all these clones are just building up my hierarchy. We're going to need to destroy those. So how about we use that sensor object that we have in our game to destroy that? Well, I guess we should just put it onto our target script. We already have a script for our targets. So, I guess, let's start with making it, let's make our targets destroy when we click them. Let's do that first so that this feels more like a game. So let's make this is pretty easy actually. I'm going to delete my update right here. At the very bottom. So I'm on my target script. I'm going to press return. So I'm right above the last curly bracket. This is where this is taking place. And we're going to make a new method called private void. And this is a very simple command. This is going to trigger when something happens. We want it to trigger when our on mouse down. So on mouse down, as you can read here, is called when the user has pressed the mouse button while over this element or collider. This is going to be using the collider essentially. It's going to say, oh, as long as our mouse is touching the collider, this target, and we press the mouse down, then whatever happens inside of this method will occur. We'll just say, well, guess what do we want to happen? We want it to destroy the game object. Destroy game object. And let's go ahead and make it so that whenever it hits any other collider, do we want to do that? Yeah, I guess we can do that. Let's go look at our sensor. Our sensor has it as an is trigger. I've already got this set up for you as an is trigger. So what we'll do, because our colliders here and our other objects are not set to is triggers, we'll say if it triggers the sensor, let's do an on trigger enter, and it will destroy itself. So line 38, I'll create a private void on trigger enter, and it automatically fills out collider underscore other. We'll do the same thing. We'll destroy this target, this game object, semicolon. So this should only work when we hit the sensor, because the sensor is the only thing that has this collider set to trigger. So it's saved, and let's test that out. Okay. Press play. So we should be able to click them to destroy them. There you go, that works. And let's see if it falls. And they are getting destroyed when they get down here to the very bottom. And I can see that in my hierarchy as well. Great. Well, I think this is enough for this first video. We've covered a lot of information. In our next video, we will be looking at how to keep track of scores, doing some effects, and mainly just using the text items in the user interface.